everyone, I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Vince.
And it's time once again
to recommend things.
What do you recommend today, Vince?
Today I recommend
Yes?
a Blu-ray called Limitless. Today, my recommend has no boundaries.
Ah.
For it is limitless. So,
I see what you did there.
it's boundaryless. Only limitless sounds better. So, Limitless is kind of a science fiction-y movie. I don't know how feasible it is, but I think it's low-key enough that it's feasible-ish. Feasible-ish. So the idea is that the main character, played by Bradley Cooper, is a writer who's kind of down on his luck. He's not really producing the level of work that he would like to. And at some point, he comes into contact with a, let's call him a drug dealer, because that's what he is. And that drug dealer has access to a very particular drug, and he's really in hot water over this drug as we see the movie progress. And that drug unlocks pretty much your brain. You can use, I think, all of your brain or a certain amount that makes you extremely effective. And as this movie progresses, these people deal with addiction, but it's not just addiction because they want to feel good. They like fix their lives. They become really smart people, and the world is clear, and it's not just a guy struggling to write that novel that he's always wanted to write, or to hit lightning again with the second novel. I forget how many he was trying to write, but he did have a deal, so I assume he had at least one. And,
generally how it works, man.
So
you know, we really like your opening paragraph.
Write a book for us. Oh, all right. But it worked out. This movie worked out really interestingly in his head, because I feel like some of it's a little stream of consciousness-like, but when he calms down, when he comes out of his this ecstatic state that he's in because of this drug, he slows back down to a normal pace, and we see the world at the pace that he's seeing it. So when he's on this drug, it's kind of a whirlwind of him doing amazing things. And I don't mean like flying or something, but I mean of him making decisions that are getting him loads of money. Now, initially, he starts out just going out there and seeing, he writes his book, he goes out and he tries to make lots of money for himself, he tries to become a financial success, and of course, eventually, the drug goes bye-bye. So, what do? Well, you gotta find a way to get more. And there are moments in this movie where I go, stop doing... You are a genius now. Why have you not thought of the thing that I thought of 20 minutes into the movie? I got so angry at times. I'm like, come on! Think of the smart thing! It's been how long during the course of this movie that you've had this drug, and all I had to do was watch you get it, and I knew what you should have done with it. So, it becomes satisfying. Because as the movie progresses, anything that you say, hey, this is the smart thing to do, he does it. So eventually, of course, that's why this movie has a couple of fallbacks. Is that it really takes him a little too long to get to the conclusions that he should have come to at the beginning, especially considering he's a genius. So
yeah, that's a tough thing to write around too, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where the conceit is not necessarily conducive to what's going on in the movie. And so it's forgivable because it's unique-ish, and I like things that are kind of low-key-ish science fiction. Now, granted, I think they could have done this on a much smaller budget than they had.
Oh, really?
But I think it might have even made an interesting low-budget movie. But, of course, their settings... If you get rich, you have to be in lavish settings, so the settings get really interesting. And, I mean, this guy even goes from being an untrimmed, really ratty-looking writer to a very professional businessman looking type person. I mean, think of the way you think of Bradley Cooper looking, and that's the way he ends up looking. It's kind of one of those teen comedy things, where the girl like, oh, you mean all I had to do was take off my glasses and let down my hair and I didn't look like such a raging book nerd? All right. I had no idea that my features were attractive. But
that is a book title that would sell, Tales of the Raging Book Nerd.
Raging book nerd. No, Bradley Cooper! Make the right decision! This is a movie. I don't care! I'm a raging nerd! So...
Pretty sure the raging book nerd was the bad guy in Misery.
I like it. And unfortunately, we're not going to segue into yours yet.
Oh.
So
I thought I set that up really nicely, too.
So Robert De Niro's in this movie.
Continue.
I highly recommend it. And yeah, I got this movie from my buddy Luke. In fact, he gave me two at the same time. So next time, I'm going to recommend Drive.
Oh, okay.
So
cool.
yeah, and yeah, go ahead.
So, hold on. Okay, so pretend it was 30 seconds ago.
Yes!
So speaking of Misery,
I did that to be mean.
Today I'm going. No, that was great. That was great. I really enjoyed it. Shut up. I'm kidding. Today I'm going to recommend. Would you stop it? A book called Stephen King on Writing, and this is something I've been wanting to recommend for a really long time, and I finally got around to finishing it. This is a book that was constantly touted up to me as being a really, really great book about writing when I was in college. You probably heard about this book some when you were in school, and more than one professor I had talked about how this is one of, if not the best book ever written, a lot of people say, on the craft of writing. What's really interesting about what Stephen King does with this, well, and that's especially interesting considering that Stephen King is not, you know, a highbrow author. Stephen King writes commercial fiction, and so it's astounding that professors of creative writing and things are touting this book up like that, and I've read it now and I agree with them. What's really interesting about this book is that it's called Stephen King on Writing, a memoir of the craft, and he literally blends those two things together. This is very autobiographical, and what it does is it has Stephen King talking about the periods of his life leading up to and then during his writing career, and he tells us about kind of his process of doing the craft, and he's very honest, sometimes brutally honest about his his success and his luck, and how these kinds of things came together for him, and a lot of it early on, or at least the first half, because the latter half really is a lot of writing advice, but it starts off kind of through this lens of this is my life and how it led up to my becoming a writer, and you actually learn a lot about writing just reading that, partly through the way he constructs just prose. You know that actually is part of it, interestingly enough, and then part of it, because I mean, here you have a master of description, Stephen King. I've always thought that, and he uses, of course, the same chops that he's got for fiction in nonfiction, and so it's really kind of fun because you learn about writing by reading, and also by writing, but reading is a lot of it. And so then what Stephen King does then is he's like I said, he's brutally honest. He says, this is my process. This is how this is when I write, this is where I write, this works for me and it might not work for you. He's very humble, and not like irritatingly so. What he tries to do is, he doesn't say this is how you must do it. He says this is how it works for me, and hopefully you might get something out of that. For instance, something Stephen King does that I do not do, of course, that's neither here nor there because he's Stephen King and I'm not.
Wait,
but
what?
But my point is that a lot of people don't do this. But this is what Stephen King does. He's got a very rigid schedule of when he writes. He writes in the morning. He writes in his office. He's got a very specific place that he writes. And no matter how much work he gets done while he's working that day, he starts at a certain time and he finishes at a certain time. And by God, that's all he does that day. That's how he operates. That's contrary to how some people do it, and it's kind of interesting because this is not a formula. There is not a mathematical there's not like a math problem that you can solve for and then get a good novel. You know what I mean? And so, by all means, this is not the only book on writing you should read. Because you learn a lot from different people and how they do things. What I really like about Stephen King is how he kind of talks. It's fun because you learn a lot about how he does it, and also you get a lot of really good advice and things that we've all heard before. Don't use too many adverbs. He's got a lot of that kind of advice, and he does what all good writers giving writing advice do, which is he gives a lot of examples. He'll give you a paragraph. This is how you do it. He'll give you another paragraph. This is how you don't do it. And what I like is that sometimes, again, in his brutal honesty, he will give bad examples from his own writing, and I really like that.
That's cool.
He is well aware of the way he is perceived by some critics, and one of the things that's kind of fun about reading this is if you know anything about Stephen King, if you've ever read his books, or if you happen to be a big Stephen King fan, you get all of this writing advice from the lens of Stephen King. So it's kind of fun learning more about the man and hearing him talk about his own books, because you don't always get that from authors. He doesn't, of course, say necessarily. Well, he'll actually talk a little bit about themes and stuff of his books, because he has this whole. I should mention that real quick here in a second. He has this whole section about theme and like how you come to theme and that kind of thing. But of course, he doesn't try to say this is what my book means. But he does. He does use some of his work as examples, and my favorite bit in the whole book is when I forget exactly what he's talking about, but he's giving some advice, and then he says, but take that with a grain of salt, because this is coming. Oh no, I know what it is. He's talking about how sometimes it's been a couple weeks since I finished this. He's talking about how sometimes you'll write great stuff, and sometimes you'll just have some duds. And not even your published work, you'll have some duds. And he says this is coming from the author of Maximum Overdrive. I just love that, because yeah, Maximum Overdrive, not that good. I have happened to have read several of Stephen King's books, and I'm not a big Stephen King fan necessarily, but I've read some of them, and he talked a lot about some of the books that I've actually read, so it's fun for me. You got to listen to him talk a little bit about Carrie, and I think he mentions Firestarter in a couple. I love Firestarter, one of my favorite books actually. And anyway, so it was a lot of fun. I'm going on a little bit. I'll quit here in a second. What I think my favorite section is when he's talking about theme, partly because I agree with him. He talks about how you can write a great story that is about ideas that is not touting a theme. I'm saying touting a lot. That's not shoving a theme in your face. You know what I mean? And what Stephen King says is theme is what rewrites are for. If you write this is really interesting. If you write a story and you go back and read it, and he suggests that after you finished a draft of something, you should let it sit for a good several weeks before you come back to it. And get some distance from it, and then you're able to read it more like you've looked at it for the first time, and things will pop out to you that you hadn't noticed before. You'll forget entire passages that you wrote. You won't remember writing them. It's a very interesting experience, and I think we've all had this to a degree. And anyway, he says that once you go back and you look at it, and you're reading it like a reader as best you can. Obviously, you can't perfectly do that. You wrote the thing, but as best you can. That's why you leave some space. Then you sit down and read it, and if you start noticing that there's kind of a central theme that seems to be popping out a little bit, then what you do is you go in and in your second draft, you enhance it. You bring it out. That's when you start really dealing with theme. Now, if you wrote a good, solid story that's about a protagonist, and he, all the stuff that we always talk about with what should happen with a protagonist in fiction, and it's a good, solid story, but it doesn't seem to be this is the theme. Don't try to force one in. It might just be a good story. And that's okay, you know. And it's really great to have somebody as successful as Stephen King come out and say that, because that's what we were taught in school, and that's what I've always believed. And I think he's right about that. And this is coming from a guy who doesn't like writing workshops and didn't really do a lot of. He obviously took some creative writing classes, but he doesn't really care for workshops, which I don't entirely agree with him on that. I actually really care a lot about. I really think that workshops can be really great. I think he just had some bad ones. But anyway, all that's really interesting. I could do I could do a long review on this book. It's really worth reading, especially if you're, obviously, especially if you're writing, but even if you're not, it's really interesting just to learn more about Stephen King.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Sounds cool to me. I like it. I had a teacher, well, actually, you and I had a teacher once.
Yeah.
And she said that over the last X amount of years, I forget how many, she said Stephen King has really become a good writer. And it's not just that... she's like, wow, Stephen King used to be terrible. Now he's great. And, I think some people would argue against that.
Yeah, sure.
But I feel like what she's really saying is Stephen King went from being a genre fiction writer to being a literary fiction writer, and he just happens to do that within genre fiction. So...
yeah, that's right. Well, and I love that about him. And in fact, I should amend something I said earlier when I said that we were we were taught that not everything has to have like a mega amount of subtext in school. Actually, that's not true. We had some teachers that said that, and some that said the opposite of that. Come to think of it, there was a little bit of lack of consensus on that point. But it's something I actually really agree with. I think you can tell really great stories that, I mean, subtext is great. Sometimes subtext presents itself without you even doing it on purpose, you know what I mean? But you don't want to force that sort of thing, because then it stops becoming a story and it starts becoming a paper in the guise of fiction, you know what I mean?
That teacher, we like to call her Professor Moriarty, because that's who she is. Laura Moriarty. They're like, really? Cool! She even said that themes and subtexts are really nice when you can put them into things, but no publisher is going to care, and not every reader is going to pick up on it. So it has to be good outside of that. Just because you have a lot of parallels and themes in your book or what have you.
Doesn't mean I care about your protagonist.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that your plot makes any sense.
She said she took a book to her publisher, and the publisher's... She's like, oh, I did this and this, and I made all these links here, and the publisher said, I really don't care. Said, does it have all the stuff in it that we told you to put in it? And she's like, well, yeah, good, we'll publish it. It's like, oh, she's like, I just want to be realistic with you guys. So, yeah, I'm just echoing, giving examples.
Well, everybody, thanks a lot for watching Recommends, and we'll have something else to recommend for you next week. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Vince.
See you later.
Catch up on my reading.